The fire truck screeched to a halt at the front gate, red lights flashing, sirens blaring, smoke curling into the sky like a signal from a war zone. But instead of a brave rescue, the first responder met a blockade in the form of a furious woman in a pink velour tracksuit, arms crossed and eyes blazing hotter than the fire itself. That woman was Karen Dobson, president of the Oak Glen HOA, and she had one message for the firefighters: no entry without HOA authorization. As flames threatened lives just yards away, Karen stood her ground and actually said the words, "Your sirens are disrupting the peace, and you're not on the approved visitor list." What no one knew, not even Karen herself, was that the fire wasn't coming from a neighbor's house. It was coming from her own basement. I was already on scene before the engines arrived, seated in my paramedic unit, double-checking oxygen tanks and thermal monitors when the 911 dispatch came through. Reports of visible smoke, possible electrical fire, location unclear. Oak Glen was known for its winding streets and identical homes stacked like copy-paste templates, so pinpointing the source was like chasing fog. I lived just outside the HOA but responded to their emergencies often, which meant I knew what kind of nightmare the board could be. And Karen, queen of petty rules and iron-fisted fines, was the worst of them. She had once fined a child for chalk art because it violated the natural earth tone aesthetic of the sidewalk. That kind of power went straight to her highlighted head. As the fire truck pulled up, I could already see the smoke thickening over the rooftop. Karen had beaten them there in her silver SUV, which she parked sideways across the narrow access road like some kind of barricade. She stood waving a clipboard as the fire captain, Harris, stepped out and tried to approach. Her voice carried all the way down the block. "This is private property. We have policies," she barked, as though emergency response times were subject to HOA committee votes. Captain Harris tried reasoning with her, even showing his badge and identifying himself as Fire Command, but Karen was relentless. "I don't care if you're the mayor," she spat. "No authorization means no entry. You'll need written notice from the HOA." Meanwhile, I stepped out of my vehicle and saw the concern on Manny's face, a rookie firefighter who'd been shadowing Harris for the past few months. He looked ready to bulldoze her himself. But even then, I thought maybe the fire was a few houses over. The smoke appeared to be drifting from 2 blocks north, so Harris ordered the team to reroute through the service road. We lost 3 minutes doing that. 3 minutes in a fire is the difference between saving a house and finding a charred frame. Then came the second obstacle. As the fire truck finally repositioned itself and backed into the block, Karen raced ahead and parked directly in front of the hydrant. Yes, you heard that right. She blocked the only working hydrant in the area. Her justification? "I don't trust people who use government water without my say-so." It was so absurd that Manny froze, hose in hand, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Harris had to physically tell him, "Step over it. We're not asking anymore." Manny did a vault over the hood, clipped the plastic flamingo lawn ornament, and sprinted toward the hydrant to connect the line. Karen shrieked like a banshee. "That flamingo is vintage." I grabbed my body cam and made sure it was rolling. I had a feeling this wouldn't end without paperwork or handcuff. Karen turned on me next, pointing a finger. "You're enabling chaos. This whole street is going on record for disruption." I replied calmly, "Karen, there is smoke coming out of someone's roof." Chaos was already invited. But here's where things took a twist. I pulled out my drone, an off-duty hobby I'd repurposed for fire spotting. I launched it into the air, scanning rooftops to get a sense of where the source was. The drone zipped through the alleyways and hovered above rooftop. That's when I noticed something bizarre. The smoke wasn't coming from the neighbor's yard. It wasn't drifting in. It was billowing out of Karen's own vent system. Her back window was slightly ajar, and I could see the flicker of orange lighting up the inside of the glass. I double-checked my monitor to be sure. Her chimney was literally puffing like a factory smokestack. I radioed Harris immediately. "You're not gonna believe this. The smoke's coming from Karen's place." The fire's in her own basement. There was silence for a second before I heard a stunned copy that. When Harris told her, Karen looked confused, then offended. That's impossible. My home is clean. I just remodeled the guest bath. It was like telling a child there's a monster under the bed, except the monster was carbon monoxide and imminent combustion. Still, even as the firefighters advanced toward her front steps, she tried to stall them. She stood on her porch, yelling legal threats. This is unlawful entry. I know my rights. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, there was something beneath her outrage, panic. Harris pushed past her, along with Manny and 2 others. I followed with a respirator and my medical bag, in case we had a burn victim. The moment the door opened, the heat punched us in the face. It was a dense, electric sort of heat, the kind that clings to your skin. The kind that means something downstairs is cooking, and not in a good way. We stormed through the ground floor, dodging ceramic ducks and porcelain cats that lined every shelf. Karen trailed behind us, screaming about lawsuits and carpet damage. The smoke was thickest near the laundry room. We pulled open the basement door, and sure enough, flames were licking up from the bottom step. Manny hit the stairs while Harris began sweeping the perimeter. Karen grabbed my sleeve. That's just my spa system. I bought a therapeutic heater from an engineer in Kentucky. He said it was military grade. I stared at her. You're telling me you installed a spa heater using what, an online coupon? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and bolted toward the stairs, trying to intercept Manny, until she slipped on a ceramic pug rug and tumbled flat on her back. Downstairs, Manny radioed that the fire seemed electrical, spreading through an odd setup of batteries and coiled wires. As the suppression crew deployed foam, I spotted something that made my stomach tighten. Next to the heater were 2 large lithium batteries wired directly into what looked like a rusty inverter. And right next to that was an open bag of sawdust and towels. The perfect kindling cocktail. I photographed everything, knowing this wasn't just a dumb accident, it was reckless endangerment. A disaster that could have taken down the whole street if we hadn't broken through Karen's barricade of pride in time. And yet, while the team worked to secure the space, Karen was already on her phone, dialing what I assumed was her lawyer. But as she sat there on her flower-patterned couch, fuming and covered in ash, all I could think was, "Congratulations, Karen. You finally made the HOA newsletter. Just not for the reason you hoped." By the time the fire was officially declared under control, Karen's once pristine front lawn looked like a post-disaster training ground. Hoses coiled like snakes across the yard, her decorative garden gnome lay on its side like it had seen too much, and foam puddles collected near the walkway, staining her beige welcome mat a shade that would haunt her earth-toned sensibilities. Karen herself had gone silent, a rare moment that everyone around her seemed to cherish like a gift. But the silence didn't mean surrender. If anything, it was the eye of a very self-righteous storm. She stood with her arms folded, watching as the firefighters rolled up the last hose, her nostrils flaring with every splash that touched her porch tiles. It wasn't over, not for her. It had only just begun. Captain Harris and I were inside the house going over the cause and damage report. The spa heater wasn't even up to residential code, let alone legal. According to Manny's inspection and the fire marshal's remote assessment, it was an illegally modified unit originally intended for outdoor agricultural heating. Somehow, Karen had installed it in her basement, powered it with repurposed electric car batteries, and sealed it off with insulation she claimed was certified organic wool. Luke, one of the inspectors who'd arrived late on the scene, looked over the wiring and shook his head. "This looks like someone watched one YouTube video and thought they were Nikola Tesla." Karen, overhearing us, finally broke her silence. "Excuse me, but that heater was a custom build by a certified energy consultant. He had an entire Facebook page and sold out 3 times last year." I turned to her, genuinely impressed by her delusion. "What's the name of the company?" She blinked. "Heat Havens." Or maybe Heat Horizons. Something with an H. I paid in gift cards, so it's tax-exempt. Harris stifled a laugh while Luke just stared, unsure if this was satire or a psychological breakdown. Outside, the neighbors had started gathering. Oak Glen was the kind of place where people didn't come out of their homes unless someone was having a garage sale or a meltdown. Today they were getting both. Word had spread fast. The HOA president's house had nearly exploded, she'd blocked firefighters, and now her entire luxury spa experience had turned her basement into a charred yoga sauna. Someone brought a lawn chair. Another guy started a live stream. Karen, noticing the attention, tried to salvage her image. She stepped up on her porch, ash still on her blouse, and declared to the gathering crowd, "I want to thank our brave firefighters. Even if their behavior today was aggressive and borderline unlawful, they did stop a potential incident." Someone shouted back, "You were the incident." The crowd chuckled. Karen tightened her lips. As the inspection continued, something strange happened. The fire department noticed that some of the HVAC ductwork in the basement had been rerouted. Not professionally, more like amateur tinkering with aluminum tape and misaligned tubes. Harris traced one vent line that curved away from the basement entirely and ended behind a false panel in Karen's laundry room. We pulled it back and found more wires, batteries, and a giant extension cord running into the wall. Karen claimed it was backup support for her eco-humidifier. But Luke, using his tablet, pulled up a building code violation list and pointed out that the setup was classified as a potential fire hazard and illegal energy storage site. The icing on the disaster cake came when Harris opened a second door in the basement, what Karen called her utility closet, and found a mess of unmarked plastic containers, scorched outlets, and charred fuses. Luke leaned in and muttered, "This isn't just negligence. This might be criminal." Karen's face paled for the first time. "I didn't know about any of that. My handyman handled it." When we asked who that was, she responded, "I think his name was Brent. Or maybe Blade. He wore sunglasses at night. Real professional." That was the moment we all realized Karen hadn't just endangered herself. She had likely been running unauthorized electrical experiments under her own home and blaming it on Facebook freelancers. Things escalated when Harris tried to document the evidence. As he raised his camera, Karen lunged toward him, shouting, "You don't have my consent to film. This is my property." She bumped into him, causing his phone to fall to the ground. Before anyone could stop her, she kicked it across the tile floor, cracking the screen. Everyone froze. Even Manny, who had been silently documenting inventory in the garage, came running back in. Did she just assault the fire captain? Karen threw her hands up. "It was an accident. I panicked. My carpet's wet." Harris didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at me and said, "Luke, secure the scene. Get a body cam shot of the basement. She's interfering with a fire investigation." That's when Karen snapped. Her voice shot up 3 octaves. "You can't do this. I'll have the HOA fine all of you for trespassing. This is tyranny." I gently took her arm to guide her away from the basement, but she jerked back and ran toward the staircase. I thought she was fleeing. But no, she locked the door behind her and slammed something heavy against it. I was officially locked in a smoke-damaged basement with 2 firefighters, a bag of lithium batteries, and a power-tripping HOA president spiraling into madness. We tried the door once, twice. Definitely blocked. Luke radioed the front team and Manny looped around the garage entrance, eventually letting us out after 5 increasingly tense minutes. Karen was nowhere in sight, but her voice echoed from the second floor. "I'm calling the district commissioner. I have powerful contacts." I replied up the stairs, "Well, tell them to bring a fire extinguisher. Your second outlet's about to short." The sheriff was called next. Not because of the fire, but because Harris now had enough to file obstruction charges. Karen must have sensed the shift in tone because she came back downstairs with her hands out, smiling in a way that said she thought charm could undo felony-level stupidity. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said, eyes darting nervously. "Let's discuss this over tea? I have jasmine." Harris looked at her like she'd just offered a band-aid to a shark bite. "You locked a federal responder in a basement during an active fire. You're lucky we're not in cuffs already." Meanwhile, her neighbors were starting to turn. Marge, one of the longtime board members, pulled me aside. "You know this isn't the first time Karen's done something dangerous, right?" I asked what she meant. Marge explained that 2 years ago, Karen tried to streamline energy in the community pool by installing second-hand heat lamps from a turkey farm. They overloaded the power grid and blacked out 3 homes. No one ever reported it because she threatened to revoke access to the clubhouse. By now, it was clear Karen wasn't just an eccentric rule enforcer. She was a walking disaster wrapped in a pastel sweater set. And the worst part? She had financial control over the HOA budget. I asked Marge for documentation. She whispered, "It's in her home office. That's why she freaked when you opened that second door. I think she's hiding more than just bad wiring." We were about to find out just how deep Karen's mess went. Because while the firefighters packed up and the sheriff arrived, Marge quietly made a call to her niece, who worked as an investigative journalist for the local paper. The story was about to go public. Karen Dobson, queen of suburban rules and lawn size restrictions, was about to become a headline for all the wrong reasons. And the worst was yet to come. Because while we had escaped the fire, what we were about to uncover in that house would make the smoke seem like a warm-up act. The house had quieted down, but not in the peaceful sense. It was the kind of eerie calm that lingers after a storm, the moment when everyone catches their breath but knows another wave is coming. Karen had retreated upstairs, barricaded herself behind her double-locked office door, and left a trail of chaos in her wake. Outside, the last of the foam was being washed off the sidewalk. Firefighters packed up their gear with the focused silence of professionals who'd seen too much and wanted nothing more than to disappear before the paperwork hit. Harris spoke briefly with the arriving sheriff deputies, his tone clipped and cold. There was no more trying to reason with Karen. Now it was just documentation, damage control, and consequences. Meanwhile, I stood with Marge under the shade of a dogwood tree, my arms crossed, trying to piece together everything she'd just told me. If what she said was true, Karen hadn't just endangered her neighbors through sheer stupidity, she had been mismanaging HOA funds for years. Not small change, either. According to Marge, Karen had sole access to the HOA emergency fund, discretionary wellness budget, and a miscellaneous category that no one ever audited. I asked how that was even allowed, and Marge looked at me with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. Because she's loud, she's intimidating, and she has a clipboard for every meeting. People got tired of arguing with her. I couldn't help but mutter, "And now we have a basement that nearly exploded and a fire department she tried to sue mid-rescue. Great job, Oak Glen." What Marge told me next changed the tone completely. She leaned in and whispered that Karen's office probably held the real keys to the kingdom. HOA financial records, unused grant forms, and possibly even evidence of fake vendor contract. According to Marge, Karen once approved a $12,000 Community Beautification Initiative for solar sidewalk lamp. The lamps were never installed. No one ever saw an invoice. When someone asked about it, Karen claimed the order got lost in transit and fined the resident for public defamation. I stared at Marge and realized she wasn't joking. That was the level of paranoia and petty tyranny we were dealing with. Karen wasn't just overreaching, she had turned HOA power into her personal empire. And now, thanks to her fire hazard, we had a window to pry open that empire. Back inside the house, things were already moving. With the sheriff now present and Karen's actions officially flagged as obstruction, they were authorized to check parts of the home deemed related to the fire or containing evidence of negligence. That included her office, despite her protestations. The officers knocked twice, waited, then proceeded to unlock the door using a master key Karen had somehow forgotten she'd given to the board for emergency protocol purposes. The door creaked open, revealing a room that looked more like a war bunker disguised as a craft store. File cabinets lined the walls, each labeled in aggressive handwriting. One said, "Sanitation Surveillance." Another simply read, "Enforcement Records, Do Not Touch." A whiteboard near the window had a flowchart on it, complete with red arrows and bold marker text. At the top, "Non-compliant residents." My name was third on the list. The real prize, however, was in the filing cabinet marked Vendor Ledger. Luke opened it slowly, flipping through folders that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. There were checks made out to companies that didn't exist, expense sheets that listed vague services like climate optimization, and one entire envelope filled with printed PayPal receipts under the name Kenny's Comfort Creations. No addresses, no tax ID numbers, no actual product descriptions. Just transaction dates and dollar amount. Luke turned to Harris. "This is beyond shady. She's either laundering HOA funds or paying for things so ridiculous no one thought to question it." Just as we were about to dig deeper, Karen appeared in the hallway, flanked by two neighbors she had apparently roped into witnessing government overreach. Her tone was righteous, her hair now pulled back into a hasty bun, and she held a manila folder like it was a legal weapon. "You're violating community bylaws. That office contains confidential homeowner files and private board information. I demand that you cease this action immediately." One of the deputies calmly responded, "Ma'am, your basement caught fire due to illegal equipment, and you obstructed first responders. This is now an active investigation." Karen scoffed, waving her folder. "That's not evidence. That's a misunderstanding. I have every right to install thermal therapy tools in my own home." Harris raised an eyebrow. "You installed a flamethrower next to car batteries. That's not therapy. That's a fire starter kit." The situation escalated again when Karen attempted to physically retrieve the folder Luke was holding. He stepped back, firm but composed. "If you touch evidence during an investigation again, we'll add tampering to the list." Karen paused, assessing her options. Then, to everyone's disbelief, she pivoted and marched into the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. We thought maybe she was going to cool off. Instead, we heard the unmistakable sound of drawers opening and a second later, a loud shatter. She had just thrown a ceramic cookie jar full of coins through the kitchen window, apparently in an effort to escape through the side yard. We all moved at once. Manny was closest and made it out the back in time to see Karen squeezing through the rose bushes, manila folder still in hand, shoeless and muttering something about how she refused to be silenced by socialist firefighters. She made it halfway down the path before stumbling over a sprinkler head and falling face first into a patch of ornamental grass. Manny reached her first, pulling the folder from under her and gently helping her up while she kicked and screamed about homeowner sovereignty. The sheriff caught up moments later and calmly informed her she was being detained for questioning and possibly arrested for destruction of property, obstruction, and tampering with a public investigation. Karen wailed, "You'll regret this. I'm on the board. I am the board." Back inside, I helped Luke scan the rest of the documents. We found HOA checks signed by Karen that had been written out to names suspiciously similar to her own, K. Dobbins, Karen D., and one just labeled KD Consulting. It didn't take a detective to see the pattern. One file even contained emails she'd printed out, in which she threatened to cut off a neighbor's mailbox access if they didn't improve their lawn symmetry. Another was a denial letter for a wheelchair ramp installation, citing aesthetic inconsistency. It was vile. It was all there. The receipts, the threats, the lies. It was more than enough to bring this HOA dictatorship to its knees. By the time the sun began to dip and the neighborhood calmed again, Karen was sitting in the back of a cruiser, arms crossed, her nose in the air. The neighbors gathered once more, this time clapping, not cheering, but slow, deliberate claps of vindication. Someone shouted, About time. And another added, is the pool open now or what? The tension that had gripped Oak Glen like a vice for years began to crack. People smiled. People joked. One guy even put a "for sale" sign in Karen's yard as a prank. Harris looked at me and said, "Well, that's one way to clean house." And still, Marge wasn't done. She approached with a copy of the HOA charter she had pulled from her own files. "There's a clause," she said. "If a sitting HOA president is found guilty of gross misconduct, we can elect a new board immediately." I asked, "Who would you even nominate?" She grinned and said, "We've been waiting for this for years. It's time someone sane ran this place." I looked around at the street, still smoky and damp but somehow brighter than it had ever felt. And deep down, I knew that whatever happened next, the age of Karen was finally going up in flames. The neighborhood had never felt so alive. Not in the usual HOA-approved, scheduled block party way, but in the real, unfiltered sense of people breathing freely again. Karen's arrest was like popping the lid off a pressure cooker that had been hissing for years. As she sat in the back of the patrol car, staring out at the community like they had betrayed her, the residents stared right back, completely unbothered. Someone walked past the cruiser and waved cheerfully like they were spotting a celebrity. Another neighbor, old Mr. Beckett, shuffled out with his walker and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Took y'all long enough." No one corrected him. The silence of Karen's rule was over, and now the real cleanup had to begin, not just of the charred basement or the ripped-up lawn, but of everything she had embedded into the HOA's crooked foundation. Back at the scene, Harris continued compiling his report while the sheriff's office made copies of every suspicious document retrieved from Karen's home office. Marge, ever the quiet observer turned reluctant hero, handed over 2 more folders she had managed to pull from Karen's locked desk drawers, one titled Enforcement Techniques and the other just labeled Leverage. The contents were bizarre and disturbing. The first contained templates of fake citations she had issued over the years, fines she had made up without board votes, and photos of residents' homes taken at odd hours. The second file was worse: notes on people's personal lives, gossip, rumors, even references to threats of exposure if someone pushed back on her authority. Karen had been running a miniature dictatorship, and until now, no one had dared to call her bluff. By early evening, word had reached the local news. A reporter from Channel 9 showed up with a camera crew, interviewing residents about the fire and the arrest. I tried to stay out of frame, but Manny wasn't so lucky. He ended up giving an on-camera statement while still covered in foam stains, holding Karen's cracked flamingo lawn ornament like a badge of honor. "Yeah, she said we couldn't enter," he told the reporter, "but turns out the fire was in her own basement." Real poetic. The clip would later go viral under the title, "HOA President Blocks Firefighters from Her Own Burning House." Comments flooded in by the thousands, and memes popped up within hours. Karen's pink velour tracksuit became an internet sensation. One user edited it onto a Game of Thrones throne with the caption, "Queen of the Ashes." While the internet lit up, real action was happening behind the scenes. Harris met privately with the fire marshal, who had just arrived on scene in person. Marshal Brenner was no stranger to Karen. In fact, he recognized her immediately. As he walked through the property and reviewed the incident details, he pulled me aside. "She used to live in Riverstone Hills, didn't she?" he asked. "Same name, same complaints. Blocked a fire crew over a chimney issue, refused to let EMTs treat a kid who slipped on a wet driveway. We filed 3 complaints on her, but she moved before anything could stick." That information hit like a brick. Karen had done this before. She was a serial HOA tyrant, jumping from community to community, accumulating power and leaving scorched earth behind, sometimes literally. We dug deeper and found that Karen had changed her last name slightly in public directories. From Dobson to Dobbins, back to Dobson again. Enough variation to dodge searches, not enough to raise suspicion from casual neighbors. When Marge overheard this, she nearly laughed out loud. You mean we're her rebound HOA? It suddenly made sense why Karen had been so aggressively controlling from the beginning. This was a playbook she'd run before. Create chaos, assume control, and silence opposition. But this time, the fire didn't just smoke out her secrets, it scorched her entire operation. The HOA board gathered that evening in the clubhouse for an emergency session. I attended with Harris and Marge, mostly to make sure Karen didn't have loyalists waiting to reinstate her. But as we stepped in, it became clear the tide had turned completely. Almost every seat was filled, and neighbors who had never spoken up before were suddenly standing tall and ready to vote. The agenda was simple: initiate a recall vote and appoint an interim president. The energy in the room was electric, like the dam of fear had finally broken. People who had been fined for planting daisies instead of HOA-approved shrubs stood up and shared their stories. Others told of Karen barging into their yards with a measuring tape, yelling about fence height or unauthorized wind chimes. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Unanimous. Karen was officially removed as HOA president, pending criminal charges and further investigation. The board, now free of her grip, nominated Marge as interim president. She accepted reluctantly but received a standing ovation nonetheless. Her first declaration as acting leader was met with cheers. No more fines without board approval. And effective immediately, all residents will receive a refund for any bogus citation issued in the last year. Someone in the back yelled, "Best HOA meeting ever!" and the room broke into applause. But the surprises weren't done yet. As the meeting wrapped up, Harris received a message from the station. A background check on Karen's so-called energy consultant, the one who sold her the spa heater, revealed something even more alarming. The man didn't exist. The business was a shell account linked to a bank account under Karen's name. She had paid herself for the heater installation and disguised it as an external contractor. The entire thing had been a fraud to pull money from HOA wellness funds. Harris looked at me and just shook his head. "You think she's dangerous with a clipboard? Give her a circuit board and she turns into a mad scientist." We returned to Karen's house one last time to check on the damage now that the fire department had cleared the area. What had once been a trophy home was now a half-gutted monument to arrogance. The basement was unusable. The walls needed to be torn out. Electrical wiring throughout the house had melted into warped loops of failure. Ironically, the only part of the home still pristine was her living room, meticulously decorated with HOA trophies and framed bylaws. Manny snapped a photo of the shelf, then tilted his head and said, "We should donate this to a museum." Exhibit A: How Not to Lead a Community. Back outside, I watched as neighbors stood in clusters, finally talking like humans instead of rule-abiding strangers. Someone rolled out a barbecue grill. A couple kids kicked a ball across the street without fear of receiving a citation. It was like the neighborhood had remembered how to be a community again. Free from fear. Free from the pink-suited tyrant who had ruled with fines and veiled threats. And then came the most surreal moment of the day. A white minivan pulled up slowly next to the sidewalk. Out stepped Karen's husband, a mild-looking man with the tired energy of someone who'd spent his entire adult life nodding through nonsense. He looked around at the scene, the fire-damaged home, the patrol cars, the neighbors all whispering. Then he looked directly at me and asked, "So, she finally went too far, huh?" I nodded, unsure of what to say. He sighed and muttered, "I told her the lithium battery thing was a bad idea." I was going to say something, but, well, you've met her. With that, he turned, walked toward the house, and disappeared inside, not even flinching as he passed the yellow tape. By nightfall, the street lights flickered on, casting long shadows over what had been a battlefield of egos, power, and smoke. But there was a new mood in the air, a lightness, a return of ownership to the people who actually lived here. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like Karen's neighborhood anymore. It felt like ours, and as I walked back to my truck, I could hear music in the distance. Someone had turned on a speaker. Someone else had opened a cooler. People were smiling. And as I drove away, I saw Manny stick the broken flamingo into Karen's front yard like a flag of liberation. The battle was over, and the rebellion had won. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. HOA president arrested after blocking firefighters from her own burning home. Suburban scandal sparks national outrage. Karen sets fire to her own rules, literally. News vans line the edge of Oak Glen like vultures circling a fresh carcass, their antennas raised and cameras rolling. One crew even brought a drone, though it didn't get far before a resident chased it off with a broom. What had started as a late afternoon emergency response had now ballooned into a full-blown media circus. Karen's name trended on local feeds all night, and by breakfast, she had reached national attention. The irony was too strong for even the most cynical audience to ignore. A woman who had weaponized bylaws and HOA control for years had sabotaged her own house and nearly the safety of an entire block. Inside her now smoke-damaged home, the cleanup had begun, though Karen herself was nowhere to be seen. After her initial detainment, she was released on bail sometime after midnight, avoiding a perp walk only because the sheriff had the decency to escort her out quietly through the back. But her quiet exit didn't matter. Her downfall had been loud enough. The HOA board had already started the process of locking her out of community systems. Passwords were changed. Access to the HOA budget was revoked. Her signature was voided on all pending documents. Marge, now officially acting president, called an emergency assembly to introduce what she dubbed the new Oak Glen Mandate, a fancy way of saying no more dictatorship, no more fake fines, no more terrorizing residents over lawn decorations or holiday lights. That morning's meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and to everyone's surprise, it was standing room only. Usually, these meetings were sparsely attended, maybe 4 or 5 bored retirees and a guy in sweatpants there for the free coffee. Today, there were over 50 residents, some of whom no one had seen in years. The energy was completely different. People were laughing, smiling, openly talking about the absurd things Karen had put them through, everything from citing a neighbor for having non-neutral bird feeders to threatening another over his wind chimes that apparently disrupted ambient harmony. One woman said Karen tried to fine her for allowing her toddler to draw smiley faces in sidewalk chalk. Someone else chimed in, "She once told me my garden gnome was too cheerful." The entire room broke out in laughter. Marge took the podium like a teacher reclaiming her classroom from a rogue substitute. She began by thanking the firefighters, the sheriff, and the residents who spoke up. Then she addressed the elephant in the room. "We were all under her thumb because we thought the alternative was worse," she said. "But now we know that doing nothing was the worse option. We let her weaponize rules, and we paid for it, some more than others. But today, we start fixing it." The vote to formally remove Karen from the HOA board was passed unanimously. Her name was erased from the charter like it had never been there. She was, for all intents and purposes, banned from ever holding a leadership position in the community again. In the hours that followed, residents formed new committees. Ones that would actually represent the community instead of serving one woman's paranoia. A safety committee was established to review emergency response protocols. A transparency committee volunteered to audit HOA expenses for the past 5 years. Even a new welcome committee was formed, dedicated to greeting new residents with friendliness instead of fine schedules. People were signing up left and right. For the first time, participation wasn't about avoiding punishment. It was about reclaiming the neighborhood. And then, just before noon, the unthinkable happened. Karen returned. Not to apologize, not to explain, but to speak. She marched down the sidewalk in a pale gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked like it might snap. She carried a clipboard, of course, though this one had no papers. It was a prop now, the last symbol of a power that had already slipped through her fingers. Residents watched in stunned silence as she walked up to the community center, stood on the low brick steps, and cleared her throat. "I know many of you are upset," she began. Her voice was low but firm, rehearsed. And I know mistakes were made. That phrasing alone made someone snort audibly. Karen pressed on. But leadership requires difficult choices. You may not have understood my methods, but I did everything with the intention of maintaining order and preserving the values of Oak Glen. That was when a resident in the crowd, Mr. Santos, raised his phone and played the video of Karen screaming at the firefighters to leave. Her words, "You're not on the guest list," boomed across the yard. Everyone fell into awkward silence. Karen froze, her confidence wilting. She tried to recover, but it was too late. The spell was broken. She turned and walked away, her face pale, her pace brisk. She didn't say another word. Later that afternoon, I stood by the edge of the lawn with Manny, watching the crews begin work on restoring Karen's damaged home. Despite everything, the house still needed repair. Insurance might refuse to pay out once they discovered the cause of the fire, an illegally installed spa heater wired into stolen batteries. There was talk of fines, lawsuits, and a possible civil case from the HOA itself. Even though she was gone from the board, she had left behind a financial trail that now needed untangling. Manny handed me a soda and said, "You think she even understands what she did?" I shrugged. She understands she lost. That might be enough for now. The highlight of the day came just before sunset. The residents gathered for what had spontaneously turned into a block party. Someone brought speakers. Someone else grilled hot dogs. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalk. Music echoed off the rooftops, not loud enough to disturb, but loud enough to remind everyone what freedom felt like. For the first time, people from opposite ends of the street were talking. No one was afraid to laugh too loudly or park slightly crooked. The mood was celebratory and relaxed, like a collective exhale after years of holding their breath. Then came the final surprise. Marge, with a cheeky smile, unveiled a new sign she had commissioned that would replace the HOA welcome board near the gate. It read, "Welcome to Oak Glen. We believe in firefighters, freedom, and flamingos." Manny immediately placed Karen's scorched lawn flamingo beside it, the cracked plastic bird now a trophy of resistance. Everyone cheered. Someone took a group photo with it. Even Mr. Beckett smiled and said, "Now that's the kind of HOA I can live with." As the sun dipped below the trees, I looked around at the street, the one I'd responded to so many times, usually in tension or chaos. It looked different now. Not because of the ash still clinging to the gutters or the yellow caution tape fluttering in the breeze, but because of the people. The real victory wasn't that Karen had been exposed. It was that the community had come together afterward, stronger and louder and funnier than ever. They had reclaimed their space. They had turned the tyranny into triumph.